All right, everybody. I did watch AEW Revolution 2024 last night. I gotta say, I was very surprised. The show was far better than I expected it to be. And like I say, if you haven't watched it, highly recommend doing so when you can. It was definitely worth it. Um, but for many of us longtime wrestling fans, even though I have my criticisms of AEW as a company, I do feel like they could be a lot better television-wise. I think they do deliver on pay-per-view, so I will be watching more. But this isn't so much about AEW. This is about looking back at the career of Sting, my memories of Sting. Growing up as a longtime wrestling fan, I started watching wrestling around 6 or 7 back when, well, in 1990 I was 6, and 1991 I was 7 years old. So, and it was definitely very emotional at the very end of this match. With him and Darby Allin versus the Young Bucks because we'd seen Sting do this so many times over the years, for almost 40 years, which is incredible. That's as long as I've been alive almost. And obviously, the memories were flowing through me a mile a minute. I wanted to do this video the night after, but it was just a lot to take in because, obviously, it's very personal to me, and especially for a lot of us older wrestling fans. And I remember, growing up and now I don't want to come off as fake or a poser. I must be real with you guys. I didn't get to watch a lot of WCW when I was a child. I watched some of it because some of my dad's friends, I know some people who had access to WCW television. Not every one of us did. So, because TBS, you had to pay more to get it there back then. But I did somewhat. I was aware of what was going on with WCW, but I didn't follow it as much. So I just got to be real with you guys. I don't want to come off as fake, as funny, say I remember every detail of Sting's career. I don't. And he'd been wrestling so long. Since, he broke in 1985. So, and like I said, I didn't watch wrestling until 1991. That being said, obviously, I remember watching some old tapes, watching some matches with him. I remember one of his first feuds I remember him being in was him against Nikita Koloff after those two broke up. I don't know the full story. I can't remember. I'm going to have to look into that. But that was one of my first memories of Sting. And now, like many in my generation, my first memory of wrestling, and I'm sure a lot of our memories of wrestling, was the WWE, which was very flashy. It was a mixture of entertainment and wrestling. And I admit, I wasn't completely sold on WCW completely when I first watched it, in 1991 when I was watching wrestling. I started to like it a lot more as I started watching it more, but it was a little just difficult to grow on me. And then you gotta remember, like, I didn't have complete access to it. I only watched the odd episode, as many episodes as I could, So it was a little different. Sometimes me and my late father would rent, tapes, from my local video store of WCW because it's the only real way we could get it. Because like I said, I didn't have, access to it. We didn't have, we just had standard cable back then. The only wrestling we ever got exposure to was the WWE. So, but I do. But keep in mind, I remember in like I really didn't get sold on WCW, of course, until 1994 when they signed Hulk Hogan, which I'll do a video on that sometime down the road. Now I admit I was a Hulk Hogan fan. I was sad to see him leave WWE, but when WCW signed Hulk Hogan, I admit I tried to pay more attention to WCW. I just kind of fell off of them. It's not that I didn't like WCW; it was just didn't really have access to it. And let's face it, my mom, bless her soul, she wasn't going to pay extra just so we can watch more wrestling. So no, it was very difficult and, to access it. But I do remember, like I think I remember watching one of my a famous match he had with during the NWA days when he wrestled Mike Rotundo. Underrated match. And then my dad showed me the Clash of the Champions match between, Ric Flair and Sting. And I gotta say, hands down, 1988, that was one of the all-time greatest matches I've ever seen. I still say that was one of the greatest. Bonafide classic. Clash of the Champions, 1988. They mentioned it during the pay-per-view. Greensboro, North Carolina. Sting versus Flair. Old wrestling fans, new wrestling fans, look that match up. It's worth it. I still think it's one of the greatest matches of all time. And I think that's when I saw that as a child. That's when I really started to, get into it. And you have to remember the impact that Sting had. Because you got to consider the fact that WWE had WrestleMania 4 playing that same night. And that show drew, I think, between 7 to 8 million viewers while WrestleMania was on. And it gives you an idea of just the impact, how over Sting was. Granted, Flair was over too. And, not everyone was willing to pay for a pay per view. I get it, And there was a divide. Some people liked WCW wrestling, some people liked the WWE style wrestling. So, I mean, it really gives you an idea of, how over Sting was in that time frame. And I remember in 19, this is a guy that's been there for the best times. He's been there for the worst of times. I mean, his career, I mean, how many from 85, 1990s, 20, 2000, 2010, 2010, 2020s, and early 2024. That's almost 5 decades of wrestling, folks. Let that sink in. And yes, some may argue maybe he hung around too long. You know, some of the criticism's understandable, but you got to give credit is due. He loved the business. He dedicated his life to the business. And as you know, pro wrestling is a very difficult business to love. It is. It's a very difficult business to find success in. And I know it's been said many times every time somebody leaves the wrestling business, especially a top tier legend leaves this business, like an Austin, like The Rock, like an Undertaker, but there will never be another Sting. There'll never be anyone like a Sting again. And that's an amazing class. That's amazing comparisons to be a part of. So when you really think about it. And yeah, he was loyal. You can't deny that too. I mean, a large reason, he was a big part of WCW's success. And even during, some of the worst years in wrestling, especially in, although even though '94 they had good product, but keep in mind, you have a WDB and WCW, neither one of them were turning a profit back then. But then 1995 came along, and as many of you know, 1995 was not a banner year for wrestling. But I remember one of my friends in elementary school, I would go over and watch a lot of WCW programming with him, and he was a big fan of Sting. But the problem is that a lot of their merchandise wasn't available in a lot of places either. I remember I did get the odd Sting shirt. I remember wearing a lot of his outfits. And everybody, almost everybody I knew loved Sting in my school years. Everybody, said, always put him atop of their favorites. And I was there for so many years. I was there when he had the blonde skate, the blonde surfer look. I remember having the brown haired look. And then let's not forget, from 1996 to 2001, many consider the golden era of wrestling. I consider that probably still one of, if not the best era of wrestling. He was a part of that too. I mean, just the eras and moments that Sting was a part of. It's really, just mind blowing. You had WCW versus the NWO. You had Hogan turning heel. I mean, this guy was a part of so many amazing moments. He was, but unfortunately, and it carried over. I mean, you go back to, fortunately, you had a highly underrated, you had the biggest night in WCW history, Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair. I mean, Hulk Hogan versus Sting. I remember watching that match live. My heart was at my throat. I was at the edge of my seat. I was just the most excited. I probably one of the most excited times I've ever been as a wrestling fan, easily, hands down. Seeing that match live, everybody in my schoolyard was talking about it. It was incredible. It was. Yeah, the match was a bit underwhelming, but you cannot deny the build up for it was unlike anything that many of us have ever experienced before, especially as wrestling fans. So, I mean, yes, sure. And then you got to remember him joining the NWO Wolfpack. You know, changing his face to red and black. I thought that was a really cool looking gimmick for him. But as you know, unfortunately, the NWO storyline started to wear thin. 1999 came along. And that's when things really went downhill for WCW from then on out. And then you go back to, this March 2001 when Nitro had that final episode, him versus Flair one more time. It was a good match, but it was also emotional. It was very sad because we were witnessing the end of an era, the end of WCW. And even though I didn't really watch a lot of WCW back then because I heard it was just resoundingly awful, but that was a special moment for me as a teenager. And it was heartbreaking because I don't think wrestling's ever really been the same since WCW went under. I mean, the excitement is just not there anymore. But then just, Sting kind of disappeared because you got to remember he didn't want to cross over to WWE, and I can't really fault him. He eventually went to TNA, and I admit I really didn't start watching TNA a little bit. And yes, TNA, his days in TNA were hit and miss. Okay, he had some good matches and good moments, but unfortunately back then, I got to be real with you guys. I wasn't that big on TNA at that time. I had a lot of issues with them, but fast forward to you know, Survivor Series 2014, 10 years ago almost. I was going through a very difficult time in my life at that period. So I admit when I was watching that pay-per-view at a friend's house, and when that music hit, when I saw that face paint on the big screen at the Titantron with WWE at the end of the match, my excitement level rose. Very, very highly, and I was just like my jaw dropped. I'm like, oh my god, no way, this can't be happening, can it? And sure enough, it was. It was just such a surreal moment to have Sting come in, you know, and save Dolph Ziggler and help the team win. And that was a great moment. Unfortunately, Sting's prediction came true, though. WWE really mishandled Sting, misused him. And I still say that, as much as I enjoyed WrestleMania 31, that was a wrong and horrible decision. I really think they should have let Sting win, but I get the feeling that a lot of the old guard and Vince and a lot of the old WWE staff, probably was in Triple H's ear, in Vince's ear, and said, no, this guy worked against you. This guy, only came here because, granted, I get it. He had a very nice payday. He wanted to, probably the best viable option to continue his career and be in the spotlight. But we all know that WWE was bitter, bitter towards Sting, and unfortunately, 2015 was not good. But he was still over. Everyone was still behind him. Everyone was talking about that moment. That was still one of the biggest moments in wrestling back then. And then he, he semi-retired, and then he got into the Hall of Fame. Well deserved. Deserved to be there. Put on an amazing and hilarious speech overall. And such a and I was happy, even though I thought it was sad because I thought it was over then. Many of us thought it was over, but thankfully it wasn't. He went to AEW, and it was all building up to this. Now I admit I wasn't really watching too much of AEW. I wasn't been watching a lot of wrestling as of late, but I may do that down the road. But it was incredible at his age. You got to remember the man's in his mid-60s to perform at the level that he is, and to be able to perform the level as he has for as long as he had is, it's a testament. It really is. Obviously, because it's not something that a lot of people get to do. I mean, a lot of people had to retire early because of injuries. Some of the best never got to finish their careers, and or go as long as they did. Only a few have. I mean, heck, even Shawn Michaels didn't have to, had to step away for a bit. I mean, the only other people that have been in there long periods of time were Hulk Hogan, Flair, Triple H, and Undertaker. But that says a lot about Sting when he's able to, match up to those guys as far as legends go, as legendary status goes. So, watching this match last night, watching his final match, it was emotional. It was. I remember I had to go for a bit of a stroll after I watched it, and I thought about me and my late father, man, really wishing he could have been there just to see this last time, because Sting is one of the main reasons why I got into wrestling, and Goodbyes are hard, goodbyes are difficult, but in life they are necessary. But this goodbye definitely hurt, and it hurt a lot. But I'm thankful I was able to see it and be a part of it. So I want to know. There's so many things to go over here, but what were your favorite memories? What were your favorite moments of Sting? What were your favorite matches? Please comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts are. Granted, kind of had some issues with this last match, though. I mean, having somebody pointed out to me using sugar glass as was kind of cheap because that's what that was. Because as you know, what sugar does when you drop it in fluid, it absorbs the color of the fluid. That's what it was. Made the cut look worse. Don't get me wrong; it was still a very intense and very brutal match, and it just had me at the edge of my seat the entire time. Because you have to understand, time-honored tradition in wrestling is you got to put the other guy over before you're leaving. That's just how it is. But if anyone deserves to break that tradition, it's Sting, and it does. And if anyone deserves the best ending, it's got to be Sting for everything he's done for the business and the company and wrestling as a whole. And when you consider how dirty WWE did him in 2015, I think he deserves to go out in the best way possible and on his terms. Because it's not something that everybody gets to do. So I can go on and on about Sting's career, but if you guys want to talk about it, just comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts are. And personally, I thought it was a great match. That was the best ending he could get. And all I want to say in closing is, well, thank you AEW for doing this, and most importantly, thank you Sting. Thank you for all the wonderful memories for so many years. I'm gonna miss you greatly. Wrestling's not gonna be the same without you, but hey, what would wrestling be if he wasn't here? Think about that, folks, and just be thankful for all the good times we had. Till then, that's all I got. Take care, everyone. Peace.